There are few people who didn't become premier who are more consequential in the politics of Alberta than Ted Morton. Ted Morton has just written his autobiography. Ted Morton is with us tonight. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, great to have you, Ted. It's a tremendous record of public service. Look, let's just do a quick fact check for people who were still in grade school when you were in politics. We're all getting older. So Ted Morton was, I think everybody knows you're a University of Calgary professor and that you're part of the famous Calgary School of Politics, which informed Prime Minister Harper. You also signed the firewall letter, and I'm going to ask you to explain that because that was 25 years ago, or nearly. You also did a stint for policy for the Reform Party back in 2001.
In Ottawa, yes. Yeah.
It's a great thing to have on your resume. You become a sort of a scholar practitioner.
It also cured me of ever wanting to go to Ottawa.
Well, okay.
A lot of people wanted me to go as an MP, and I said, no, if I'm going to get into politics, it's going to be in Edmonton.
And you were elected a senator in waiting, so that could have so easily gone wrong for you, couldn't it? You never got appointed, but...
Maybe, thankfully, but I shouldn't say that, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, we want to elect our senators here. But I think even more important for the purposes of this discussion, for 10 years, you were in the bear pit of Alberta politics. You held 3 top-flight ministries, energy, environment, I guess they called it sustainable resource development, but it was the Ministry of Hunting and Shooting and Fishing, and of property rights. And then, of course, you were Minister of Finance. And you made a very serious run at becoming Premier of the province. Want to come back to that, too. But federally and provincially, Ted, you've seen it all from the inside.
And I have the scars to prove it.
And you've got some funny stories, I see, as well. But look, I've known you for nearly 25 years, Ted, and I think it was actually Danielle Smith who introduced us back in the corridor of the Calgary Herald editorial board. But you always struck me as somebody a little bit in the Stephen Harper mold who wanted not so much to be something as to do something. And that little resume that we've just been over is a record of doing things. Maybe they weren't always as successful as you intended, but you were there because you wanted to see change, and change in the conservative mold. And this is actually, here's a pre-release copy. I need a Strong and Free. That's the book, and I guess it's going to be available in bookstores throughout Alberta next Wednesday, 2 days' time. 3 days.
September 25th, yes.
September the 25th. And I'm not even going to tell you what the price is because at the price is offered, it's a bargain for the information and the lore that's contained in here. But here's the thing. It's a different sort of political memoir, Ted. What you so often get is somebody's quest for self-gratification, a little malice perhaps, and some self-exculpatory paragraphs. And this book is not like that at all. It's more of a history of a mission by a lot of people. Like when you go through the index, it takes a while, and you suddenly see, I know these people, this person and this person and this person, everybody who has had anything to do with the Grand Canadian March or the Grand Alberta March.
The Alberta March, yes.
The Alberta March is probably going to see themselves or somebody they know very well in the index. And then, of course, like everybody, they look to see whether they're in it and so forth. Now, then, here's the thing. When you became an activist, Ted, when all this started, what was driving you? Was it Senate reform?
Well, in the beginning, yes. I mean, at a deeper level, I became aware in the first decade that I was teaching at the university, so that's the 1980s, of Alberta's history and the imbalance between Western Canada and Central Canada, not just the recent imbalance, but going right back to Confederation, 1905, that all the other provinces got their natural resources Crown resources upon becoming provinces. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba did not. That took a 25-year battle to just to get that equality. And the Senate reform, again, with my American background and coming from a small state, Wyoming in the U.S., I saw how the U.S. Senate protected the smaller states to defend their interest, and something that didn't happen here in Canada. So the Senate reform, the Reform Party, that was my entree, I guess, into Alberta politics.
So, Ted, why did it matter to you? You came from the United States. You could have gone back there if you liked that system, but you decided you wanted to change Alberta. Why?
I think like thousands or tens of thousands of other people that have come to Alberta from other places, I fell in love with it. We have the mountains, the foothills, the prairies, incredibly beautiful province, a wonderful culture too. I think it's very much a meritocracy. Yeah, certainly the Alberta, the Calgary I grew up in, people didn't care, where you were from, or what church you belonged to, or no church, or what. If you were hardworking, honest, and committed, they wanted you on the team. So I think that has been part of Alberta's success, part of the success in an abstract way, I guess, for liberal democracies everywhere. I want to keep that, and I can see in many respects it's very much under attack, even then, and even more so now. So we have something very good here in Alberta, and it's worth fighting to defend it.
Well, I 100% agree with you on that. What did we actually achieve in terms of Senate reform?
Zero. The Senate reform thing, in theory, it makes sense. It's not just the United States. I've been to Australia. I've actually spoken to the Australian Senate. Why Canada wants what or at least Western Canada wants what Australia has. It's a way for the less populated regions to articulate and defend their interest in a legitimate way. So in theory, all other mature federal states have a second chamber, a Senate or something like a Senate, to allow for that and to create the balance. We don't, and we've paid a price for it, both nationally but particularly provincially. But it's not going to happen now. The Supreme Court, when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, of course, he brought in some draft legislation to create voluntary, non-mandatory elections for other provinces like Alberta has. Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. In my opinion, I've written about this, a very, very weak, and frankly, I think I better be careful what I say, a very weak opinion. And then also in the mid-90s, the Chrétien government passed something called the Regional Veto Act, which says the federal government won't approve any constitutional amendments unless all the provinces, or at least, well, specifically, if Quebec doesn't approve it, Ottawa won't. So Senate reform is dead, and I would, in theory, it's a great idea. It would address our issues, but it's not going to happen in my lifetime or your lifetime. I think abolishing the Senate would be a much more fruitful way to approach things. And I think the part of our plan was more Alberta in Ottawa or less Ottawa in Alberta. And the more Alberta in Ottawa, that was Senate reform, and it hasn't worked. I don't think it's going to work anytime soon. So the alternative is less Ottawa in Alberta, and that's what the firewall is about. And I think that's what Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Act is about.
Well, you wrote in the firewall letter that a referendum in Alberta on a clear question, such as on equalization, could lead to meaningful negotiation. Now, we had a referendum.
And we got a clear majority on a clear question.
I thought it was clear. Nothing happened.
No, and so you could say it was a waste of time. I don't think it was. The clear majority on a clear question, those aren't my words. Those are the words from the Supreme Court of Canada. And that was their answer to Quebec, the Quebec secession reference. Mm-hmm. And of course, when it's Quebec that's knocking on the door and asking, surprise, surprise, the justices are much more pay much closer attention to keeping everybody happy. So they said, with respect to a referendum to secede, for Quebec to leave, that if there was a clear majority on a clear question, constitutional question, then there was a duty to negotiate. So that's the Supreme Court that said that. That's now a constitutional precedent. And why wasn't, in the Constitution, it didn't say just for Quebec. It said in general terms, it applies to everybody. So did the Liberals ignore it? Of course they ignored it. But it's a way of mobilizing public support and raising public awareness of the double standard, the hypocrisy, certainly of the Liberal Party, federal Liberal Party, but also, I'm afraid to say, the Supreme Court, where there's one standard or one rule for Quebec and then a different set of rules for the rest of us. And
I think, well, Ted, I think a lot of
it didn't result in changes in equalization, but I think it raised awareness, consciousness, and it's a fight worth fighting. We're still losing close to $20 billion a year in net transfers out of province to Ottawa, and most of it goes to Quebec.
Yes. Well, I think that's one of those realities, like the legality of the Income Tax Act, that you can have a very refined discussion and probably win the argument, but in the end, the system rolls along and they just can't afford to lose the money, so they find a way. That's my opinion, not yours, of course. But here's before we leave the Senate, we've just had 2 Alberta appointments, and you said 5 minutes ago that abolition of the Senate might be a step forward, and I look at the 2 recent appointments, and I have to agree. Seriously, exactly. Was there a message there?
Well, not only could almost no Albertans tell you who our senators are, but I can tell you that in the caucus, in the government up in Edmonton, no caucus members or even cabinet ministers could tell you could name more than at the most 1 or 2 senators. When we would go to Ottawa, if we had a real Senate, you'd go to Ottawa and spend time with your senators, because that would be the forum in which the smaller, less populated provinces could articulate and defend our interest. But the Senate is meaningless. It's just a retirement home for, one of the 2 most recent appointees from Alberta. Nobody has, except you and I and maybe 20 or 30, even know who they are. One's, I'll be careful what I say, a very generous donor to the Liberal Party of Canada. Surprise, surprise. And the other is a big crusader for LGBTQ rights. So, and I think he's only 50 something. So he'll be crusading against parents' rights that are enshrined in, the United Nations Declaration of Rights, the right of parents to choose the education and be informed about the education of their parents. That'll be our other senator for the next 25 years. So yeah, let's abolish it.
I see. Well, the case for abolition makes itself.
Exactly.
Okay. Before we leave the idea of the Senate, the fact is that it is in being. They do have some power, maybe not as much as they think they have, but they do have influence. And
legally, constitutionally, they do.
Yeah, they do. Now, one of the little-known facts is that when you were running for the Senate, you had a volunteer working with you, a University of Calgary student who is today the leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre. He could very well be Canada's next prime minister. So for him,
let's hope he is.
Let's hope he is. Yes, of course. But for him, the Senate is going to be an issue. I think something like 85 senators out of 108 103 have been appointed by the present prime minister. Admittedly, they market themselves as independents, but they all get
don't buy that.
I don't buy it either. They all get the emails and they all think the same way, but otherwise they wouldn't have been appointed. So what advice would you give Mr. Poilievre if he were to ask for it on how to stick handle important legislation through the Senate?
Well, if the Liberal dominated, if Justin Trudeau's Liberal Senate tries to block policies elected by a United Conservative, or excuse me, Conservative Party of Canada majority government led by Pierre, if they try and block the democratic mandate of the Canadian election, that's a constitutional crisis. And the fault, all the positive is on the side of an new elected majority government, and it cannot be blocked by a bunch of appointed, unelected, unaccountable senators sitting over there in their couple $100,000 a year sinecures, where they do whatever. They can talk for all day, but they do virtually. All of a sudden, again, it goes back to the double standard. And if they try, did they ever stop anything from Trudeau and the Liberals? Of course not. So it's the double standard, and it would be a crisis. And but I think Pierre Poilievre is up to handling that.
Well, I certainly believe he is, but he has shown remarkable political acumen. In the book, you talk about what you call the unlikely marriage of rural conservatives and Calgary conservatives to form the 40-year PC dynasty. You could make the argument, and I think you do, it's there, that the marriage is back together in the United Conservative Party under Danielle Smith. But it seems less dependable now, especially after COVID. Do you think that I think Danielle is doing a wonderful job, but if there was some other person in there, they would face the same party structure. Is there anyone else who can keep these factions of the party marching in lockstep?
Well, all parties, and particularly all majority governments, are coalitions of different interests, different geographic interests, different economic interests, different social interests. So party unity is always a challenge. Alberta has historically, I think, been unique in the last couple of decades, where conservative governments were, well, certainly was a 44-year dynasty, where the conservatives were able to win majorities both in the cities and in rural. So that was the coalition that I'm talking about. But there are obviously tensions in that coalition. COVID brought them out. Let's knock on wood that we don't have another COVID type experience again. I think any conservative premier would have been hard pressed by the COVID, because given the nature of our coalition, and all parties are coalitions, the Libertarians thought that Jason Kenney did way too many restrictions. But of course, lots of people in the middle and the moderates thought he didn't do enough, too much or not enough. He got crucified on that issue, and I'm not sure. I don't think I would have done much better. So hopefully something like that won't happen again. But I would hope that the members of the caucus and the members of the UCP now realize that we can have big arguments inside the party, and let's have those arguments, because these are important issues, and neither side, nobody has a monopoly on the right answer. But what we don't need is two conservative parties again and dividing the conservative vote. That's a recipe for electing, as we've seen, NDP or Liberal governments. And so let's have the arguments. They can be strenuous arguments, but let's treat each other with respect and accept that whoever wins the argument, whatever the issue is this year, it's open for the other side to win next year or the year after. But let's not get back into dividing the conservative vote with two different parties again. That was one of my big criteria, something that led me in not deciding to go to the Wild Rose after I lost the PC leadership part, because I thought two parties is a guaranteed recipe for Liberals and Indies, and that's of course what happened.
So, yes, Ted, I mean, since you brought up your own run at the leadership, it invites me to comment that the system we have of choosing leaders, where there are three, and because number one isn't far enough ahead of number two, you end up with number three, seems to still be the party mechanism for choosing a leader. Um, I Do you feel that that's, to me, that looks like how they lost in 2015? That's there are some other issues, but the fact that we had the wrong leader in 2015 perhaps was a big part of losing government. Or am I just misinterpreting the landscape? What do you say?
Well, I think by 2015, the conservatives were destined to defeat. It had been the discrediting of the party over both, certainly in terms of fiscal management, but also in terms of social policy. The rural-urban coalition had come completely apart. You had the Wild Rose. Prentice came in and tried to put things back together, but again, Prentice, like the predecessors, like Redford, like Stelmach, the PC party never endorsed or accepted the Western alienation issue, the firewall agenda, the fair deal, the demand for a better deal, a fair deal from Ottawa. And, by 2015, we'd been fighting for that federally for over 20 years, back into the 90s, 25 years. And federally, Albertans were voting overwhelmingly for that. And you still had a PC party led by someone and led by three people in a row. After I didn't win in 2006, Stelmach, Redford, and then Prentice, who didn't embrace the need for change and reform. So I understand why people voted Wild Rose. In fact, if you go on the internet long enough, even on my Facebook page, I think there's a picture of me supporting a couple of Wild Rose candidates in Calgary who had helped me in northeast Calgary, had helped me back in one of the leadership races. So the PC party basically destroyed itself by failing to embrace the issues that Preston Manning, the Reform Party, and all of us that worked with Preston, the Reform Party, argued for, and were winning big majorities across the province for 2 decades. The PC party and the people we kept, because of the screwed up leadership selection process, we kept selecting leaders who were the least conservative of any of the candidates. So
would you go so far as to say that towards the end, the party wasn't really conservative in any recognizable way?
Well, I think Redford would have been as a liberal in any other province. I mean, the fact of the matter was, after the Lougheed years, if you wanted to be in government, and be part of a majority government, you had to put on the Tory blue, and so one of the things I discovered very quickly when I was elected in 2004 and went up to the caucus was that it was filled with lots of people who were elected as conservatives, but who in fact were not particularly conservative at all. But if you wanted to be on the dance floor in Alberta, you had to put on the Tory blue silks. That was particularly true of, I would say, a lot of the people from a lot of the PC MLAs from the Edmonton area. And of course, for reasons of self-interest, they became strong lobbyists for policies, and this worked very well for Stelmach, that were not very conservative, because that's how they were going to get reelected up in Edmonton. So there was a problem.
Ted, we're going to be out of time here quite quickly, but I want to bring you back to where we began about the sort of the march of the generations in pursuit of this conservative cause. And the left has its own long march through the institutions. I mean, you probably taught that in political science.
And it's in the appendix. There are a couple of appendices to the book, and the second appendix addresses that issue very specifically.
Okay, well then, so we have, and you are a large part of, our own conservative in Alberta march from somewhere to somewhere. What was the journey? Who were the players? What satisfaction do you take from seeing Mr. Poilievre in Ottawa, Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta? What does the next generation do? Just talk about it. Free flow.
Well, I dedicate the book to Preston Manning, and I say very explicitly in the dedication, right in the front of the book, that without Preston Manning, there would have been, no Stephen Harper, no Jason Kenney, no Danielle Smith, no Pierre Poilievre. This has been. He started the march. He restarted the march that you can trace back. Lougheed did his bit. Another Manning before Lougheed. Alberta premiers. We've had a series of very wonderful premiers, but everything they've gotten from Ottawa, they fought for. As I said before, the beneficiaries of the status quo don't give up their privileges voluntarily. You got to push. You got to take. And the newest version of that was started by Preston and the Reform Party in the 80s and 90s. Certainly my attempt to seek the leadership of the PC party in 2006 was an attempt to bring that movement into the PC party inside of Alberta. I failed, but I think the work that I did, and again, Preston, myself, you can't have leaders without followers. You can't have leaders without supporters. And part of the reason I wrote this book was to send a message to everybody that helped me and worked for me and supported me. We lost the leadership race and we didn't achieve what we wanted to as early as we did, but we set the foundation and did a lot of the training for the success enjoyed more recently by Kenney, Smith, and Poilievre. So I think the last sentence of the last chapter says something like, we want a fair deal. We want a strong and prosperous Canada, but a fair deal for Alberta. And the next chapter is going to be written by the next generation of leaders. So part of my reason for writing the book was, one, tell people that our generation, what we did mattered and helped, but also send a message to all the people we just named that keep on marching. Remember, that was the slogan of Alberta's first senator-elect to be appointed.
Well, Ted, it's a great story, and it's a story that shouldn't be lost. You, I think, were explicit about that, and it's one of the reasons why you wrote the book, so that we have a record that is both a testimony and also an encouragement going forward to other young conservatives. So look, Ted, it's been great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for taking the time. You have a book launch event on the
26th. Yeah, there's still room. I think if you go online, you can find an online way to register. And I think they're taking
a Ted Morton book or something. What would people type in?
Ted Morton book launch, strong and free, something like that.
That'll get there. Good.
I think we have over 100 people already have RSVP'd, and we'd like to get it up to 150, 200 people. And Preston's going to be there. Preston's going to speak. I'll speak, and I think there'll be a lot of familiar faces. It'll be a little bit of a celebration.
I think it will. It's going to be quite a week between your event, the Ted Byfield event, which of course the Western Standard is pleased to support, and also let's not forget the Justice Center having their George Jonas Awards on Friday. Conservatives getting together over food and drink. What could be more fitting?
Thank you for inviting me, Nigel.
Thank you for being on the program, Ted. It's been a great pleasure. For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.
If the name Ted Byfield brings back fond memories, well, we got a party coming up for you guys. On September 25th, Toasting Ted is what it's called. It's going to honor a great conservative who published Alberta Report news magazine. It's going to be bagpipes, singing, live auction stakes, speeches by Premier Smith, Preston Manning, Stephen Harper. Quite a lineup. The Western Standard is the final incarnation, or the latest incarnation, of Alberta Report that Ted Byfield founded. And I mean, he was a great Albertan. He really made his mark on this province, and this evening of celebration for him is really going to be outstanding. You get there, toastingted.ca. That's the website. You can get your tickets. This one's going to sell out. I mean, again, if you want to see Smith, Manning, Harper, all in one spot, one night, be sure to get there.